Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have former IB International Baccalaureate student Shit Take Satire essay, What IB Really Taught Me, a breakdown of California public schools and its pandering performative pedagogues and progressive penitents, with bonus life tips about what school won't teach you, posted by Shout Out Henchman, and that's a cross post they made to the IBO subreddit. Satire, you're not oppressed, you're right. IB's Guide to Selective Introspection, former IB student reflecting on the madness, with sarcasm fully activated with bonus life tips for young minds. And yeah, it's quite a long essay, so I think I'll just read their disclaimer. They wrote, disclaimer, this is meant as a satire and shit takes for catharsis, maybe some bitterness, but not without reflection or actual true life character growth. My takes are intentionally absurd, and to the extreme degree, I'm not mad at history, I'm just tired of being cast as its villain before I even open my mouth. Obviously, the program isn't established as portrayed, and I learned a lot. I'm a villain on the spectrum, actually diagnosed, which means that this comes out as a slightly chaotic stream of consciousness format, but hey, at least you're not trying to read my handwriting. I'm not rejecting empathy or awareness, I'm rejecting the performative guilt trip that treats skin tone like a moral flaw and turns out curiosity into a liability. If you made it for variety without questioning its ideological slant, congrats, but some of us noticed the pattern. This is for those who can or could taste and smell it. It was in the IB program until I dropped out in late junior year, mostly spurned by angry program leader who refused to check her own biases. Technically, I never fully escaped it. Most of my classes were tagged as AP/IB hybrids, and the alternative standard classes felt like chaos of a bell schedule, so I stuck around the edge of the beast to still graduate with honors and a well-padded transcript. This is written from the perspective of middle-income, maximum stretch, heteronormative, mostly Caucasian male, the old American default, someone who always felt like the unacknowledged villain of the classroom narrative. That sense hasn't faded. In fact, friends of mine who now teach in the IB system and the hyper-liberal California education standards assure me it's only gotten worse, and calling out broken narratives is verboten. A few of the books I referenced might have come from the time of California junior college courses or personal deep dives, not strictly from the official IB list, but I'm trying to stick to it for the most part. My temporal memory is accurate, even if my transcript isn't particularly. This isn't a manifesto, it's not a cry for help, it's just a long overdue eye roll, delivered with wit, venom, and maybe a few actual insights, plus it's fun to have motivation to write anything. Enjoy. Much of this could just be that my school district or program coordinators were heavy on guilt-based enlightenment. And yeah, and that was their disclaimer. And yeah, I would agree with all that. The thing is, education these days, in a lot of sense, is just progressive indoctrination. I saw it myself when I went to public school. It's kind of just makes you want to be like an activist and fight for social justice. But in reality, that's just they're just pushing their agenda on you. I think true education, students should be arguably teaching themselves rather than have an agenda pushed at them. And I think thanks to the internet and social media, that's easier to do now than ever. I think the libertarian position is, if you want to go to school, that's fine. But I think the school is inherently a collectivist institution that will enforce its values on you. So I think the libertarian position is to be more anti-school than pro-school. And if you want to send your kids to school or homeschool them, you should be able to. I think the libertarian position is more deschooling. To encourage children to learn for themselves rather than have the state enforce its agenda upon you. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Corporation for Public Broadcasting will shut down from the New York Times. Posted by Lemon Limelight, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting said Friday that it would shut down next year, effectively ending its half-century role as a backer of NPR, PBS, and local radio and TV stations across the United States. Congress voted last month to claw back more than $500 million of the organization's annual funding in a narrow vote that played out along party lines. The forced the corporation to a cash crunch. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is among the first casualties of the clawback, which puts public radio and TV stations across the United States at risk of going dark. Some scores stations rely on government financing to fund their operations, especially those in rural areas. Now public broadcasters are turning to foundation funders, philanthropists, and local donors to help resolve the coming crash crunch. Local stations across the United States have been seen now pouring of financial relief, with members in their areas turning out in droves to support their fire programs. Experts say those donations by themselves will not be sufficient to offset the elimination of government funding. However, a broader overhaul of the public broadcasting system is needed. Do you support the end of federal funding for public broadcasting? And my thoughts on that are, I personally do think, public broadcasting, it's not the worst thing the government funds. It's definitely better than bonds for the Middle East. With that being said, I don't think, people should be forced to pay for public broadcasting if they don't want to. And right now they pretty much are forced to. NPR is pretty much all just is liberal hogwash. So I definitely don't think that will be missed too much. PBS, a lot of their news programs are liberal hogwash. PBS Kids is decent, I guess. But even then, the private sector could easily fill in as well, I definitely would prefer PBS Kids to Cocomelon, but still, you shouldn't be forced to fund stuff like PBS or NPR if you don't want to. And right now, the government pretty much forces you, and that's why I don't think we should have public media at all. I remember there was a big fuss a couple years ago about Elon Musk when he took over Twitter. He marked NPR and PBS as state-funded media, and they had a big hissy fit about that. And I think the thing is that they are state-funded, and you gotta cut their funding. And if people want to fund them, that's fine. But you shouldn't be forced to fund them if you don't want to. Then we have Constitution of the United States website has removed sections from web.archive.org posted by Swamp Yankee Dan, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And the post on the Law subreddit says Section 910 are no longer on the website. Writ of habeas corpus is be removed also. And personally, I think this is either a glitch or just, some WWE stuff, That's pretty much all politics is at this point. It's all pretty much just performative, kayfabe, WWE stuff. If it wasn't a glitch, I'm personally leaning toward it being a glitch, but if it wasn't a glitch, it's probably just the administration trolling and Reddit, saying, oh, this is this week's rage bait, I guess, this day's rage bait. Reddit always seems to have Trump always seems to put out some rage bait for Redditors every day, it looks like, and they take the bait without fail every single time for over a decade now. And eventually, you gotta wise up and stop taking the bait and let him and ignore him. If you because nothing would hurt that guy more than just ignoring everything he does. But Reddit, they'll always take his bait, and they'll always fall for whatever the current outrage is, and eventually you just get tired of it. It's a lot of people on the other side of the aisle, the more conservative aisle, they have kind of their weekly outrages as well, but at the very least, they confine them to like X, not Reddit. Reddit, is pretty much all just whatever the today's liberal outrage is, and that's my thought on that issue. Then we have Ford paid $800 million in tariff costs over 3 months despite building most of its cars in America. That should put an end to the Trump administration's silly talking point about how there is no tariff for products built in the U.S. from Reason.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's a cross post from the We the Fifth subreddit. And personally, I don't really care for tariffs. They're just another form of taxation, in my opinion. They're taxing imported goods. But with that being said, just because things are built in the U.S. doesn't mean that tariffs don't affect them, because as it said in the article, Ford, they're building their cars in the U.S. and they still need to import materials from abroad, and that's something that's important to remember as well. So I personally don't really care for tariffs, but ultimately the administration will justify what it justifies, and since they have the monopoly on legal use of force, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Then we have Maxwell told Blanche she never saw Trump do anything concerning with Epstein. Report from independent.co.uk, posted by Dr. Who 07. And personally, I don't really. I think Maxwell, she's probably just fighting for her life at this point, because they might Epstein her, they might take her out if she spills too many beans. But regardless, I think it's interesting how she was in the in-group. She was a Reddit moderator under the name Maxwell Hill, most likely, because the coincidence, it's too many facts for it to be a coincidence. But regardless, now that she's saying Trump didn't do anything, she's suddenly in the outgroup and the worst thing ever. And Reddit, they didn't care about Epstein for when it first happened. They said, oh, if you think Epstein killed himself, you're a conspiracy theorist. But now that Donald's indicated, suddenly it's all they can talk about. And it's pretty much that, they have no values other than Orange Man bad. And as I said, it's a lot of people got when it comes to politics. No values, only teams. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump administration says teenagers can now be ICE agents from Newsweek.com, posted by Donald Key. And personally, I don't think anyone should be an ICE agent, but if they want to hire teenagers, I think they should be able to do so. Reddit always complains that kids can do enough fit stuff. But so ultimately, I do think if they ice one star changer should be able to do like that. I personally wouldn't care for them any more than I currently do. Then we have, these are the people whose votes count more than yours, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Leopards Ate My Face subreddit, and that post is, can someone explain it to her? And that was it looks like a Facebook account, I Love Conroe. Can someone please explain in layman's terms, or having to pay taxes, tariffs on items shipped to us in the States? We heard something shipped from Africa and had to pay UPS over $300 to reimburse them before they were able to give us our packages ordered. My ignorance is that I didn't realize we had to pay, or it got passed on to us. I'm simply not understanding. I only thought Trump's tariffs were paid by other countries, not us. The UPS driver was only able to understand to tell us that it cost UPS to get the package into their possession. I seriously thought Siller had to pay this, not us. I'm sure I'm missing many things here. Please don't take my post as an opportunity to bash Trump or this in a political post. I simply would like an educated explanation so I can better understand the process so that we don't repeat another purchase like the one we ordered. We live and learn, that's for sure. Thank you in advance. And yeah, it just goes to show you how, a lot of voters don't really know how tariffs are going to impact them, and they still voted for them anyway. So the thing is, this is, I think, a good argument against democracy. People shouldn't be voting for democracy's forced collective, and they shouldn't be voting for their own oppression. And I think the libertarian position is, we need voluntary collectivism rather than forced collectivism. And yeah, if it were up to me, I'd abolish the centralized democracy, and we'd return the United States into a decentralized Holy Roman Empire like government, where it's very decentralized and in each area is very local government. So much, I think the libertarian position is supports secession down to the individual level. Maybe the U.S. will turn into like 100 million different countries, or 300. Maybe each person will be a different country. I don't know. Ultimately, the idea of the country is subjective. If one person wants to identify as a country, people should be able to identify whatever as whatever they want to. And that's my thought on that issue. Then we have why a NASA satellite that scientists and farmers rely on may be destroyed on purpose from NPR.org, posted by XGH737. And yeah, personally, I do think we shouldn't be destroying that, but ultimately, it does cost money to run, and the government is trying to market itself as cutting government waste currently. So personally, I don't know how useful actually is. NPR is of course going to market any government cuts at all as fascism. So but you have to wonder how useful it actually is, and if it's worth the money we're putting into it. And if it's not, I personally would agree with the decision to destroy it. Next we have Tim Apple brings offerings to Dear Leader, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Cringe TikTok subreddit. Chat, is this corruption in broad daylight in front of everyone's eyes? And that's looks like a post from some news company. Apple CEO gives Trump unique with 20 plaque with 24 cold base. And yeah, if Tim Apple wants to bend over, or I think his name's actually like Tim Appel, I forgot his name, Tim Cook, yeah, that's it, yeah, CEO of Apple, but Trump calls him Tim Apple, but yeah, if he wants to bend over and suck Trump's cock, I think he should be able to. I think every corporation, if they want to bend over and suck Trump's cock, they should be able to. But, I think the libertarian position is, it just goes that big government and big business are often intertwined at the hip. And the libertarian position is, we got to stand up against elites, whether they be from big government or big business. That's back in the early 2010s. The Tea Party was like big business is the source, or big government is all the source of all our problems. And then the Occupy Wall Street was like big business is the source of all our problems. And that's why they started pushing it. And then they're about to realize that, we have the same enemy in the elite class. But then they started pushing stuff like identity politics and Donald Trump to divide people, and that's why we have the culture war as we see it today, because of they don't want the underclass to unite against the ruling class. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.